Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Madeline Fitzgerald, and I am the manager of adult programs here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our conversation on collecting, inspired by the exhibition American Modernism from the Charles Butt Collection. On behalf of the museum, I would especially like to welcome and thank our members who are in the audience this evening. It is because of your generosity that our collection and special exhibitions are free and open to everyone. If you are not currently a member, I encourage you to join after the talk by visiting the membership table out in the atrium or by going to our website at cartermuseum.org. I would like to thank the Art Bridges Foundation's Access for All program for their generous support of Second Thursdays at the Carter. Every second Thursday, you can connect with art through cocktails, conversations, and creativity. Each month, you'll find something different, from performances, artist talks, and unique tours, to art making, music, and films. American Modernism from the Charles Butt Collection is organized by the Amon Carter Museum of American Art with support from the Texas Commission on the Arts. I would like to thank the students and faculty from Tarrant County College for providing American Sign Language interpretation for tonight's talk. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers this evening. Joining Shirley Reece-Hughes, the Carter's senior curator of paintings, sculpture, and works on paper, are Joan Wyatt and Andrew Schoelkopf. Joan Wyatt graduated with a degree in art history from Sweetbriar College in Virginia. She was the registrar at Richard York Gallery, located in New York City in the mid-1980s. In 2002, and much to her delight, she found her way back to the art world through her work collaborating with Charles Butt and managing and curating his collection. In addition, she has worked with him on numerous special initiatives, including the art program at the Holdsworth Center in Austin and various design projects. Joan is civically engaged in San Antonio and is married to Richie Wyatt, and they have two adult sons, Henry and Taylor. And Andrew Schoelkopf is the owner of Schoelkopf Gallery. He founded the firm, then Menconi and Schoelkopf, in 2001 and has since led the business to become a leader in the field of American art and a trusted advisor to the nation's preeminent museums and private collectors. Andrew previously spent 10 years at Christie's in varying roles, including Senior Vice President and Director of the American Paintings Department, Director of Business Development for North and South America, and President of Christie's Internet Auctions. During his time there, he also served on Christie's Business Development, Management, and Operating Committees. He holds a bachelor's degree from Denison University and an MBA from Fordham University Graduate School of Business. Andrew and his wife, Grace, have two grown children and live in Greenwich, Connecticut. Immediately following their conversation, we will transition to a Q&A with all of you. I will have a microphone, which will allow for your questions to be heard in the recording of tonight's talk, which we will also upload to the Carter's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Please join me in welcoming Joan Wyatt, Andrew Schoelkopf, and Shirley Reece-Hughes.
Well, thank you all so much for coming this evening. It is such a pleasure to sit down with Joan and Andy, who Andy I've known for quite some time now, worked with at the Carter, and Joan I had the pleasure to meet fairly recently, only a few years ago, in relation to the Charles Butt Collection. And tonight we're going to start with kind of the beginnings, I think, of, if Joan doesn't mind, because this is kind of gives you the sense of collecting can begin anywhere. And so I thought we'd start. Joan has a wonderful story. This is about Charles Butt and his collecting history, if you'd like to start with this.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This was not this example, which is in the National Gallery of Art, but when Charles was a student in college at the University of Pennsylvania, he was an avid sailor from Corpus Christi, and fish out of water in Philly, was walking by a bookstore and found a copy of, I think it was a Reader's Digest. It may have been something else, but it was a framed cover of a very inexpensive magazine representing this picture. He paid $1 for it, and it was already framed, so he didn't have to pay for framing on top of the $1 that he paid for the piece. And he still has it. It's still hanging in the house, which is kind of a fun little anecdote. It started very early.
And it leads into my first question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who's just beginning to collect art?
It depends on the person, obviously. We my business partner, Alana, and I own a gallery and an art advisory company and appraisal company. When people come to us for advice, they usually have already started a collection. And there are some commonalities, right? We used to joke that major collectors of art almost always have the kind of collecting gene. So when they were kids, they collected stamps or coins, or there was this kind of interest in understanding and seeing things come together and learning about things. If somebody new comes to us now and they want to build a significant collection, I mean, Charles's has taken 60 years to build. And is unusual in many ways. But many times somebody will come to us before they bought their, they're just getting started. They bought a few things and they kind of don't, it's like, wow, we have 5 things now. It's a collection, and what are we going to do with it, and why are we doing this? And, it doesn't make any sense to us yet. And our advice is always the same. Let's just go look at as much art as possible and see what you have an emotional response to. Because when people come to us collecting to make money, we almost always say thank you, but no thank you, because it just never works if you approach it that way. It's almost always a failure. So, for us, it's almost the commonality is it's driven by a personal passion or a serious interest in learning, right? Paintings that we live with, sculptures that we live with should bring us joy. If you don't love them and they don't bring you joy, there's no point in owning them, in my view. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we work with people, that have legacy collections like Charles does, that have grown to a scale and a quality that, you have to think about their purpose and their reason and otherwise. We like people to take a lot of time to consider things, to look a lot before they leap. And almost none of them do that or follow that advice. So there is one really interesting statistic which has always resonated with me, and it hasn't really changed over the last 35 years, which is about 2/3 of people that collect art buy their first object when they're on vacation. And it's almost always like, okay, we've got the weekend off. I'm out there with my partner or my wife, and we're having fun, or with my family, and we buy something that means something to us, that reminds us of this great experience in this free time. And usually that's because there's already an interest there, but this is just the moment we have to take that time and make that first commitment.
That's interesting.
But I'll say, sorry to bang on, pardon me, but
keep going.
I'll say one of the most special experiences of my career was going to a John Marin exhibition with Charles, who has the great collection of John Marins in private hands. And, being able to see pictures when they're in a museum exhibition, particularly when you see an artist you love in a retrospective, you just learn so much from observing that and experiencing it, and, seeing it multiple times, reading the book, thinking about what other people think about it. Almost all the time when we do that with a client, we end up with a different outcome than we went to the show with, which is, wow, I didn't know the artist did that late in their career. And so I became much more interested in that. So go to the museum a lot, look at a lot, read a lot, and then, ask a lot of questions. I mean, we kind of exist in our business to answer questions and educate and inform people. So don't be embarrassed or ashamed to ask questions, because it's the art business has a way of being opaque and being off-putting to new buyers, and that's something we're working all the time to overcome. So, doors always open. Art fairs are helping that a lot. Just go look, and see what you like.
And in addition to going to look in galleries and museums and different places, there are also so many incredible online tools now that you can, like Artsy, for example. I used that a couple of years ago for my personal needs, for looking for something, and I didn't know what I wanted, and I think I must have looked at 5,000 things. They're all different, but you can do it all online. It's not anything near the same as experiencing something in person by any stretch, but it is fun and it helps you to figure out what you like. And that is a good thing. The more you look, the more, you figure out what it is that you respond to.
And you all basically answered my next question, which is how a new collector can develop their eye and confidence. And it sounds like looking, obviously asking questions and being open and just continually looking and studying.
Yeah, I've heard people say many times it's like wine. You taste the first glass of wine that's pretty good and you think, wow, that's pretty good. And over time, if you keep looking and keep looking and keep looking, you kind of develop a nose or a palate for it, and you better understand what makes a picture that really connects with you and that kind of thing.
Great. And I also think if you look around your home and you like the things that you've already purchased, your sofa, your chair, your rug, the sweater, your favorite sweater, if you look around and you love the things that you already have, that should give you confidence that you will meet with success when you go out into the art place and try to find something
That's a great point,
Yeah.
because you're choosing, it's very personal. You're choosing a design of a sofa or a lamp or article of clothing that's a reflection of you and then helps you, build that makes a great point.
And if you look around and you don't like anything that you have, then run. Don't walk to Andy.
Are there any particular pitfalls or common mistakes that first-time collectors should avoid?
Yeah, the big one for us is usually don't buy too much too fast, because your taste changes a lot. And particularly if whatever your budget is, let's say, or whatever you're comfortable with. My wife and I collect in a modest way. We have a limited budget versus my clients, for sure. So if we're going to buy something for $5,000, $10,000, we take our time, figure it out, and we make sure that it's something we're going to live with. When you get to more valuable things, we are always sending paintings on approval to clients' homes so they can live with it. Even for a weekend or something, you learn something different about the picture if you're living with it and, see that. But, the biggest mistake we see is too much too fast. And then, because the art market has grown so incredibly much over the last 30 years, and it appears to everybody on the fringes, if you read the newspapers, like it's just been going up. We know that 85% of all contemporary artists' prices will go down. They go up very fast if they're very popular, and almost all the time they come down. So, trading in and out of stuff is a disaster in the art business. You want to collect, not transact, right? At any level of any price or whatever. It's always a bad idea to do that.
That's great. And I did want to also, since we're talking about Charles Butt's collection as the backdrop, Joan knows the collection, has worked with Charles for many years now. And, obviously for the Carter's galleries, I only could select so many artworks, and I chose a focus of American Modernism because it relates so much to the museum founder, Ruth Carter Stevenson's objectives when she was establishing the collection. But Joan has kindly also put in some really remarkable works that Charles, I think this one was a particular one that Charles
Yes.
gravitated to.
Yes.
And
The painting by Ernie Barnes that came up at auction, and it was not one that caught my eye in the catalog, but it definitely caught Charles's. And I think it shows you this and some of the others that will come up, just the variety of things that he responds to aesthetically. And this one, I think, is primarily aesthetically, certainly, but the subject matter of an individual practicing excellence, doing what he loves, and when there's nobody else around. The title is called One on None. And Ernie Barnes, you all probably, if that name doesn't sound familiar, it may. You may be familiar with one of his other paintings, which was made very famous by Norman Lear back in the 70s. It was the opening painting in what was the name of
Good
the show?
Times.
Good Times. Thank
Yeah.
you. And it was called the Love Shack, and it was or Sugar Shack.
Sugar Shack. And I know this only because I was recently in Houston. And it's on view at the Houston. The lender lent it.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Keep going.
Thank you.
Yes.
And it was also on the cover of who was it? The album. Anyway, I'm just struggling to think of the recording artist who.
I can't remember. I'm embarrassed to say.
Anyway, it was on an album, but Ernie Barnes was. Do you want to hear the story of how?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, no, this
kind
is
of fun. He was raised in the Jim Crow South, North Carolina. His mother was a housekeeper for an prominent attorney in town, and she would bring Ernie along with her to work. And the attorney for whom she worked really loved Ernie, and Ernie loved this man, and this man introduced him to art and music and literature, and he was a sponge and soaked it all up. And he was actually also an NFL football player, which was the avenue open to him at that time professionally. That was the road that he took. And when he was being finally, he'd been traded to multiple teams, and when he was with his final team, the owner said, Ernie, I think it's time for you to hang up playing football and just focus on painting. And Ernie said, yeah, I think you're right. He realized that when he was in the mashup, in the pileup, the tackle thing, he was just focusing on the bodies and their forms. And so he did. He hung it up and focused exclusively on his painting, and it was,
worth it.
This one is so cool, too, because it's framed in this very humble, whitewashed wood frame, and as many of his works are. And it's because he was leaving his father's house after his father had passed away, and the picket fence all around the property, he was feeling so sad about never going to, visit his father in this home again. He was like, oh, this wood, the fence, I'm going to use it for my frames. And so he framed this and many of his paintings with that picket fence. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent.
No, this is so fascinating. It's a beautiful story. And it talks, it also speaks to kind of the personal memento that he's, framing his art in and as a remembrance. So that's no, that was wonderful. Thank you. Oscar Blumner is an artist that's represented in the collection upstairs, but I know that Charles had so many beautiful Blumners. I was like having a hard time trying to wean him down. Was there something about this one?
This one came from Andy.
Yeah, it's a super special thing, which, we always love researching the pictures. You can find the actual facts about them, of course, but sometimes marks on the back or correspondence will lead you to great stories. So Alfred Stieglitz, who was married famously to George O'Keeffe and was the great pioneer of American contemporary art at the beginning of modernism, this is the only Blumner that he owned, which is sort of surprising because Blumner was a serious part of the modernist movement, exhibited some great pictures from around this date and a few years earlier in the 1913 Armory Show. He's a great artist, but he was a German immigrant and he was always being maltreated, right? And this picture, we found a AS stamp on the back of it for Alfred Stieglitz. And then we found the correspondence. And what happened to this picture is Stieglitz died in 1946, and George O'Keeffe, if you look at the catalog raisonné for George O'Keeffe, you'll see that there's only one major oil painted that year because she was Stieglitz's executor, and this was a huge responsibility for her. There was a massive collection of art, and she struck an amazing idea, which was she gave it to 7 major institutions, 1 historically black university, and 6 major museums, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Metropolitan Museum. For example, the Art Institute of Chicago got 113 Marins, many O'Keeffes, et cetera. Stieglitz had a massive collection. But we always wondered why this was the one Blumner that he owned. And they had a falling out, and they couldn't work together. They were both kind of brusque. So when O'Keeffe needed to raise some money in 1946, she was incredibly successful and sold all through her lifetime. In the late 20s, she became the most valuable living painter in America. It was on the front page of the New York Times. $10,000 each for 2 paintings of flowers. $20,000 is a huge sum. But the estate needed money, so they went to a man named Erhard Wyatt, who had been from a family that had dominated the global markets for printed books in Germany in the late 18th, early 19th century. And then he moved to London and took over the map market and the atlas market. And then he moved to New York during World War I and became an art dealer and befriended a lot of artists. And he bought this picture and a few other things from O'Keeffe to give it a little liquidity, the estate a little liquidity. We sold it for the great-grandchildren of Erhard Wyatt. So when we got the picture, I don't think it had ever been on a wall. It was in cardboard bundle sort of thing. Mm. And it's just one of his great, great pictures with a kind of an interesting history.
You know, this brings me to a question when you're talking about the Ernie Barnes and we're talking about this. Like, how do you define value in art? Is it historical? It's obviously, it's a beautiful picture, also has great historical significance, cultural, emotional, financial, a combination probably.
Yeah.
But how would you kind of describe that combination if you could?
If you determine market value, there are lots of formal ways to do it. And the most reasonable or easiest is to value it like a house. You look at the comparable sales and you say, well, there are only 4 of these that have sold from 1915 to 1918, which is a great moment for him. And you look at what all the other houses on the block have sold for. That gets harder and harder the more valuable you become because rarity is a major driver. But the underpinnings of valuations in the market are really shifting right now. Ernie Barnes that we just looked at is maybe the greatest example of the last decade. So I'm going to guess 12 years ago, the world auction record was $86,000. He was just being discovered, but like many black artists and like many artists that came from different backgrounds, he wasn't part of the canon and therefore not well studied in art history and therefore kind of left out of a lot of market appreciation. O'Keeffe is one of the few women before World War II that kind of escaped that orbit and became commercially successful. But now Ernie Barnes, the Sugar Shack painting came up and a record producer bought it for $15 million. So we went from $86,000 to $15 million in, I'm going to say 8 years, right? And that may seem kind of crazy, but that's about taking a lot of slack out of the line, like that many women artists, many Black artists were worth a great deal less than their peers. And Shirley's been really focused on that at the Carter to just great outcomes. So you'll see in the front foyer, there's an incredible painting by Norman Lewis, which is a relatively recent acquisition for the Carter. Norman Lewis is the only Black artist pictured in that very famous photograph on the cover of Time magazine of the Abex painters. And his values were like Pollock and de Kooning now 50, 100 million for a major picture, probably more. And his values were terribly low all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s and 90s. And there's been a lot of catch up. So the traditional canon artists have suffered and come down a little bit. And a lot of women artists, Black artists, Latinx artists, et cetera, and a lot of living painters have come up, much more quickly. So we're starting to see some better balance. I think some things have gotten a little out of whack, personally. The appreciation, when you're up 2,000%, 3,000% in 6-7 years, you just wonder how sustainable that is. But there's been a really healthy flattening out and equaling out of a lot of these things, which has been kind of nice to see. But art is very, very difficult to value. So we track a lot of market intelligence and try and figure out what the public auctions do, what's paid privately. We look at loan agreements when people lend or generous enough to lend to the Carter and other institutions. And you kind of assemble all that together and figure out kind of what makes sense. Yeah. And then people like Joan and Charles make us justify it and explain what we believe and why we believe it. And there's always a healthy dialogue about that.
To Andy's point, the art history canons get written and then they become these sort of textbooks that are used, over and over again in art historical colleges and classes. And what Andy's speaking to also not only in the market, but the recognition of so many voices that have been left out of the traditional canon. I mean, like the first W.H. Jansen, the famous art historical book that every student had no women in it. So, times are changing in this reflection of the broader voices and contributions, particularly to American art.
It's a really wonderful development.
It is.
You see it reflected in institutions and in private collections, and it's an exciting time.
Yeah. I mean, I'd also say one other thing, which is I'm 59 now, and I started working in my father's gallery when I was a teenager, so kind of 40 years. This is definitely the hardest time ever in my lifetime to evaluate works of art because there are so many more inputs, right? Because we can look at, if we're pricing something for a new estate, we look at how many people are searching for that artist online, how many mentions there are in social media. You can follow a market, and sometimes we have a lot of difficulty if there's a real gap in something rare, figuring out, how much the market's grown, how much international recognition there is. That kind of thing can be very, very difficult. So now we even look at metrics like for Hopper and O'Keeffe, they've gotten to that kind of massive $50 million and above level. You can look at a whole ton of metrics that prove that that's valid. Like how many people go to their museum shows. Like they'll have major shows internationally and 700,000 people will come see it. They're constantly looked at on social media. They're constantly searched for. So we have so much more data that we actually have to sometimes interpret that too.
I wanted to show that early O'Keeffe that you...
That's so great.
This is in Charles' collection, and you were talking earlier. O'Keeffe was a student, right, Andy?
We think 1902. She was 15 years old.
15, yeah.
This beautiful little watercolor.
Yeah.
That has all of the things that grocer sailor from Corpus Christi would respond to: a lighthouse and a sailboat and beautiful trees and yeah.
Keefe had no children of her own, but she believed passionately in children, particularly young girls. And she encouraged Alfred Stieglitz to close his gallery to selling O'Keeffe's and John Marin's and Hartley's. and they started doing annually an exhibition of children's art, which was really remarkable in the day. She also did in 1927 a really interesting thing, which is she curated, using her fame. She was reaching the height of her popularity in the late 20s before the crash, and she curated an exhibition at the Opportunity Gallery of all women painters. I mean, she was a person, an artist, and a person way, way ahead of her time and deeply committed to her beliefs and her values.
Did she teach
She
for a
taught,
very brief period of time at
She taught in Texas.
Texas?
Yeah.
At
Canyon,
and
Texas.
then Virginia for a bit. Yeah.
Yes. I did a
Yeah.
show up in the mezzanine galleries that's all based on the Carter's relationship with O'Keeffe, because we did a retrospective of her in 1966. But she'd come to Texas to teach twice, once in Amarillo. Anyway,
That is definitely worth a look, by
Yeah.
the way,
Yeah.
because that's an embarrassment of riches. There's some great O'Keeffes.
But so we're but as you were saying, I think someone's doing an O'Keeffe show every year because of her popularity. So we get requests every year, and that was part of my inspiration for doing that show, so that everybody could see what we have. But this is a great example. Joan was talking about, like, what you mentioned about Charles and his responding, and it also answers the question: what role do regional artists and local scenes play in the larger art market?
So this is a beautiful watercolor by Malou Flato, who grew up in Corpus. She's a great watercolorist, and she is also works in acrylic medium. But she's a friend of Charles's, and Charles has always been supportive of her artistic pursuits, life and career as an artist, a regional artist, I would say. And what an amazing place to look when you are beginning to collect is your own backyard. I know Fort Worth has a dynamic art scene, as does San Antonio. Incredible visual arts happening in our very own towns, and supporting local galleries and places like Art Pace in San Antonio, which is an extraordinary artist residency organization that supports every 3 months. They support a Texas artist, a national artist, and an international artist. And it is remarkable how far that has gone to develop local talent into a broader appeal oftentimes. And sometimes those artists, local artists, have become international artists. So Malou is a great example of, Charles supporting and championing her work. I think she has gone on. She's actually, many of her pieces are in different central markets all over, and some, maybe a few HEBs. She did some beautiful painted tiles. And anyway, the idea of looking to your local market is a great resource. And there are, in addition to galleries, some of our cities have great printing presses, like Flatbed in Austin, nurturing phenomenal talent across the state. And they're wonderful resources for young collectors, beginning collectors. And works on paper really are the gateway drug to a more significant collecting habit. But works on paper are more accessible, price-wise.
Absolutely.
And
And, Joan and I were talking, that Charles has many more works on paper that I couldn't include in the show. But did he start out with a passion for paper, or did it develop over time?
I think that paper was as a younger collector, that was a category that was accessible to him. And in San Antonio, the McNay has done for, I think, almost 30 years a print fair. And prior to that, they did something akin to that. And they would have dealers from all over the country, still do have dealers from all over the country come with their works on paper. And Charles purchased many things from the print fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then met dealers who he nurtured relationships with, who would then, go see them when you're in New York or wherever. Yeah.
And that brings us to an interesting point talking about, it's a good question for people who want to start an art collection, the importance of advisors in working with dealers.
Yeah.
And
so Charles was in his 20s, and I believe this was purchased from a dealer in Philadelphia. And it has pride of place. There's a brass plaque right next to it that has been inscribed with these words: "This is not a George Inness." So he purchased it thinking it was a George Inness, but it was not. It was, I guess, he then came to learn this dealer was not especially reputable. And, he realized that he said that was a great learning experience, because he realized that he needed to avail himself of the incredible resources that were available to him with the expertise that he could find in galleries and auction houses. And I think that kind of was a catalyst for deeper engagement and study.
yeah.
Yeah.
In his defense, I will say, though, that Inness was the hottest contemporary artist in America in 1885, because the academic tradition of really crisply delineating, painting super tight pictures was going out the window because of Impressionism and the Barbizon. And Inness was one of the few artists of that day that was faked as a contemporary artist. People were making Inness fakes in the 1880s, which is pretty unusual.
That
So
is.
they're a little tough. I mean, because you can see a very old picture from 1885, and it just doesn't happen to be an Inness, even though it's signed Inness and everything else. I would say don't be super worried about that. We can solve that problem for you. And there are not all that many fakes.
Yeah.
When there's a big fake or forgery, it gets in the newspaper and we all read about it, but it's very, very uncommon. Very uncommon.
And it's still a good painting.
It's a great painting. Yeah.
I was going to go back and talk a little bit about, because talking about, and this raises the question of what makes a collection meaningful beyond individual works and cohesive in a certain way. And you all might get an impression of Charles Butt's taste and collection that Joan and he built together. But then there's these very unusual works that obviously I couldn't incorporate into an American art museum, but have wonderful stories behind them.
This is just a great example of the breadth of things that appeal to Charles and his eye. And I think there's humor in this piece. It's over 500 years old. That is what I love about the breadth of the things that Charles has collected over time. I mean, this coexists so beautifully with some of the other pieces. And I love the mix of this piece with a marine painting. And anyway, I just think this one is so charming. And I have to think that this appealed to Charles. I wasn't with him when he found this. This kind of, the drunk is being pushed into the pigsty, but the the drunk is kind of going along with it, and there's a cheeky little grin on his face, and it's just good fun.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of humor in art. I mean, Bruegel
Yeah.
was known for it, but you don't see
Yeah.
as much of that today.
Right.
So it's very charming. And then bringing up the sailboat and the passion and the wonderful
Yes,
story
and
you had
his-
about how this appealed to him.
Yeah, just the love of everything related to the sea and sailing. And I remember when I first was becoming acquainted with the things that were already in the collection. And I mean, this is an extraordinary painting by Buttersworth. It is gorgeous. And the light and it's like a luminous piece. But, you know, one sailboat, another sailboat, and another one and another one. But that's because I didn't know, like Charles does. He knows everything about these boats, that the race, the America's Cup race that it is depicting. You know, he was like, look at that water, that is accurate. That is the way the water actually, this is true. And my appreciation for these 19th century marine pictures has grown exponentially. And that is something that you touched on earlier, I think, is taking the time to really live with something, be exposed to something, spend time with it. I remember seeing a Twachtman when I worked at Richard York, and I did not like it. It was hanging right over my desk. By the end of the 3-month period, I loved that piece so much. Your eye can change and develop and grow.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was a big, exciting purchase that Charles made probably 30 years ago, and from the Glenn Foster collection.
Yeah.
And he can tell you all about Mayflower leading Puritan, and
He's a
he's
sailor.
a true sailor.
Yeah, so that passion for a
Yeah.
subject I found interesting that
Yeah.
he loved this work. And then we talked about that. And then Marston Hartley, of course, part of the Stieglitz Circle.
Yep.
Was this a work you found? Or
I think you bought it at auction.
Okay.
We had it at one point in time, but it's from a group of really interesting pictures. So 1907, 1908 is really kind of before modernism in America. Matisse is painting kind of modernist pictures in 1905, right? So this is the very genesis of modernism. What I've always loved about these pictures, Hartley was, I think, the great American modernist, but he was difficult. We think maybe even bipolar. He was very depressive at times, and he never had two nickels to rub together. And John Marin and George O'Keeffe were the two artists of the Stieglitz Circle that were selling like hotcakes. Sold out shows all the time when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s for years, decades. Hartley really struggled, but he's a sensational artist. And this picture and this series of these little pictures, I think, are so special because he's taking Impressionism and kind of moving it more modern. And this is at the very beginning of his career. These pictures made up his first major exhibition, I think in 1908 or 1909. There's another picture of this series that's on view in the exhibition, which is very large, 36 inches square. And those were the pictures at the beginning of American modernism. It was a very special and very good thing.
And it's the size of a piece of notebook paper. It's like this, but the bam pow wall power that it has from across the room. I mean, I remember, seeing it for the first time, and it just, it grabs
that
you.
power.
Yeah.
There's still something I remember from walking through exhibitions with Charles before. There's really something that lights his fire as it does mine and lots of others, is that when you see the beginning of a movement or the beginning of an idea, those people adopting that early have to have that kind of confidence to be pioneers. We've talked often about John Marin, and the last time we saw that exhibition at the McNay, it was about wow, Marin is so good. He's like a serial innovator. And Charles and I spoke about that a bunch. It's like he did something for 6-7 years and he got, okay, I've done that. Great. Got to change and do something else. And those artists, think of Picasso, like how many different voices somebody like Picasso has. It's because they're so smart, so good that they can make these jump shifts all along their career. That's something that makes a truly great artist, whether they're a writer, songwriter,
Great
painter,
observation.
and something
That's
that really
so true.
lights my fire about that picture. Yeah.
And you brought up the fact, this brings me to a question about what role do auction houses play as compared to galleries? What would you say? Because you found this evidently at an auction house. So
Yes.
do you continue to look at auction houses?
It's
for Charles,
yes.
or
Well, this is an interesting question. I think that it's a fluid.
Yeah.
Sometimes the auction houses, it feels like they have the very best material. And then there's a trend where I feel like that's not the case.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I feel like that it has, certainly in the field of American art, it feels like the very best material has been in the galleries of late.
I think it kind of ebbs and flows. And as someone that worked in auctions, so in the early 90s, we did a study. We were really focused on the $1 million and up painting, which was, I mean, it's still just a jaw-dropping sum of money for a painting, but now paintings have sold for over 100 million a bunch of times. This is crazy, right? But in those days, something like half or a little more than half of the people in the United States we thought had the capacity, willingness, and interest to buy $1 million painting lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And now that is all out the window, right? I mean, it's a joke. And now if we get a great Hartley painting or a great O'Keeffe, the buyer is as likely or more likely to be from Asia, Europe, the Middle East as they are for America. So like the entire dynamic of the art business has changed and the scale of it is just totally different, fundamentally different. It's something like 20 times as big in 30 years.
wow.
And the volume of people that participate is really stunning now. It's a big, big, big field now, which it didn't used to be
And
30
I
years
wonder,
ago.
do you think part of that is because of online access?
Yeah. I think
It
that
used to be that you would have to go, right? Or you would have had to have paid a large subscription fee to receive catalogs in your category of interest from the auction houses, right?
Yeah.
And now you can just go online and look.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. And
Yeah.
not to say, I want to just say the auction houses also have amazing material, amazing. But I do feel like there's just an ebb and flow where it's just a fluid thing.
That makes total
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah,
it's
it's also-
timing.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a flatter and faster world in
Yeah.
every way from the 90s, right? So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why some of these contemporary artists go up so fast is because it's not a secret and somebody in Seoul, South Korea is buying one 6 months later. I mean, that just didn't happen 40, 50, 60 years ago. So the peaks and valleys are faster and more severe and the information's all flattened out. So, on the research side for us, one of the great things is if we find a picture and we want to learn more about it, we can just pull up. You don't have to. I used to have to get on a train when I was at Christie's and go to the Archives of American Art and pull the reel of microfilm, right? I mean, I'm kind of getting old, but I'm not that old. I'm 59, right? So this was when I was 25. You think of how different it is.
Yeah.
I can get it on my phone
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
It's
So
crazy.
I think actually that has really changed the scale of the business in another way too, which is we can all learn so much more, so much faster. And if you go see a picture in an exhibition, you can use the QR code and read the biography of the artist. The connection you can make with them is so immediate. And we see that life cycle of collecting it is kind of smashed, into a very short thing, which is one of the reasons we say kind of take your time a little bit because the impulse can be there, but you just want to kind of process that.
I agree. And I mean, I love looking at auctions online just to give a sense also of what's for sale,
Yeah.
what's out there. And it does give you information, readily information. And auction houses, I think, have gotten so much better about doing research about objects and providing information. And I have to say, Andy Schoelkopf's gallery is the most thorough. If you're going to buy an artwork from
Amazing.
Schoelkopf, you know they have thoroughly vetted that painting, and you get a great article, description, research behind it. So always comforting to have that if working with a dealer. I love this work. It's in the collection, up on view in the museum.
I love it.
And it's on paper. It's a rare Homer.
Purchased from you.
I was this.
Yes, and it's from
right.
Winslow Homer, exceptional artist. The Carter's great picture upstairs is just one of the masterpieces. But he's a great serial innovator. He doesn't spend more than 8 or 10 years on any one idea. He's like, done it. Okay, I'm all done with that. I'm the greatest realist painter in America. I'm going to take some time off and become the greatest living watercolor artist on earth is kind of his plan. And he's like that smart and that ambitious and that arrogant, frankly. And to be a great creator, you have to be a little arrogant. He happens to be able to back it up, right? But this is a super nice picture, great picture with an amazing story. Homer is hired to go down to the Bahamas not as an illustrator, but to make some great pictures for publication. I think it was in Scribner's. And this journey really, he was painting very beautiful in the 1870s, incredibly beautiful watercolors, but in a very refined and delicate way. And then he goes to Bahamas and he sees the color and the light and everything changes for him. And it's perfect timing with his career. So he starts to get much more ambitious and brings a lot of color to the pictures. This is a super special thing, though, too, in as much as there's this kind of cloudy bit that he leaves to the right there is something called the Queen's Steps. And in the 18th century, enslaved people were asked to build a series of steps to make it easy for the Queen to get to the top of the hill when she got off her boat. Later, when I think it was Queen Victoria, probably, declared slavery over in all of the British colonies. And they renamed the steps, the Queen's Steps, in a very positive way. In gratitude for her abolishing slavery, basically. But so this is, one of the great artists. I think you could easily argue that Homer and Sargent, Winslow Homer and John Singer Sargent, are the two great watercolorists in American art history, in my view, and probably a lot of others. And this is just a super special picture from the right moment in the 1880s. Yeah.
And we've talked about that. And this is very unusual. And it also brings me to a question. I'm going to allow you to talk about this because this is in Charles Butt's collection. But what do you think distinguishes a collection from an accumulation of artworks?
That's a good question.
That's a toughie.
It's a tough question.
It really is.
Yeah.
I think that, I do think that prior to working with Andy, Charles was purchasing and collecting things that he had a strong emotional connection to. Regardless of its period, country of origin, whatever. We became more laser focused, I think, in the last 8 years, 10 years.
Something like that, yeah.
And, honing in on American modernism. I don't know how you separate the two because the collection in its entirety there is a focus to it in the sense that it is made up of things that Charles loves.
Yeah.
We do not have any other clients, nor do we know of anyone else on earth that has Bruegel, Flato, O'Keeffe, etc. This is very unusual.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons is Charles has a very strategic view of the world. He's incredibly intelligent. He's also incredibly well read. So he happens to have a lot of passions and interests that he knows a lot about. But I would say on the flip side of this, none of us is ever going to have a collection like this. Let's be honest, right? It's never going to happen. But we've also worked with folks. We worked with a guy for years, wonderful man for years in Atlanta, Georgia, who owns 12 American works on paper. They're all from 1885 to 1895. He never spent, he spent sizable amounts of money, tens of thousands of dollars. Every once in a while, more than 100, which is obviously a huge amount of money for a painting. But that is one of the most successful collections I know, because he knew this is what I have to spend over 15, 20 years. I want to learn so much about these things and enjoy them so much. And that super focused collection is so powerful and so good. On the other hand, Charles's collection is good over hundreds of years. That's just pretty unusual. So another thing that we often recommend is, unless you want to grow a major collection for big purpose, a little bit of focus is a very good thing, because you can buy 8 or 10 things and really have a fabulous collection of just 10 things or 8 things. And, he just happens to have the intellectual capacity and the other capacities to do it.
Right. That's well said. This was something he got turned on to Donald Judd by a dealer in Houston, Janie C. Lee, who,
she's famous.
Yeah. And it was like, Charles, you've got to, let me tell you about Donald Judd. And that's was how that all began. His interest in Judd was from a dealer.
Is this the only sculpture?
No, it is. There's one other Judd sculpture.
Well, and Charles also has suites of Donald Judd's amazing prints. He really
works
is
on paper.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah.
And Judd, as you can tell, was a minimalist. So, very different from looking at Homer or looking at Marston Hartley or other artists. So I'm going to change gears, and I have a question that I'm wondering if you can answer. What ethical responsibilities do you think come along with collecting art? Like restitution or sustainability? That's a tough question.
Well, I think you want me to dive into that one?
Please.
I think it kind of runs the gamut depending on the collector's perspective on these things. I think the best collectors we've worked with tend to view themselves as stewards of the things because, they're not going to own them forever. The Bruegel, for example, wouldn't exist unless for 5 centuries somebody had been looking after it pretty good, right? So I think, it does a small collection that's for your personal enjoyment doesn't bring with it a lot of ethical responsibility or other responsibility. But when a collection gets to a scale that it needs a really smart, experienced person running it, that's a different matter. But I think we always encourage collectors to lend to museum shows. I think you have a responsibility to the artist, actually, or the artist's estate or foundation to do that, and just to be a good steward of it.
Yeah. And
that's great.
Yeah, this is kind of a question, but obviously an observation too, like the role of private collectors complementing that of museums. And obviously this was wonderful because Charles is sharing his collection only with Texans, because it's going from here to the Blount Museum to Houston and then San Antonio. But are there other ways, what considerations do you think go into people lending or donating artworks to museums?
Well, that they're steady, solid institutions with good leadership and good governance, and they're embedded in the community, and they have a robust role in the community that the community embraces and supports. All of those things factor into the confidence that a collector feels to lend.
Yeah.
Well, and I think nowadays there's a very healthy sense, particularly for very active collectors, of partnership across a lot of folks. There are dealers they work with, art advisor if they have one, the museums that they support. I mean, Shirley, I'm sure, gives her time to patrons and shows them exhibitions and teaches them about the artists. We always hope that those patrons repay that generosity and kindness, and there's a sense of partnership. I mean, not everyone can afford to give away art, right? So it doesn't always happen. But this is something we're dealing with a lot right now because of this notion of the kind of silver tsunami, they're calling it, of the art market has grown so much and so much wealth has been created in the world. We now have all of this valuable art in private hands. It's kind of transforming the world of museums. So I would expect there to be huge, huge shifts in art to institutions over the next 20 years. I mean, the art market, as much as it's grown, is not big enough to absorb everything that needs to be sold, given, or we work with families that give some things to the children, some things to the museum, sell a few things because they can't do all of one thing. And that kind of legacy planning we're working on a lot these days in our art advisory business. Because, if particularly people that have bought things a long time ago, if you bought O'Keeffe's in the 70s, you were very well-to-do in the 70s. They were very popular, very valuable, but you'd be gobsmacked at the change in value. They're up 100 times or something crazy like that, right? So that shift in the market has also changed people's planning. What are we going to do with it if we have a serious collection?
Thank you. Well, I think we need to get to questions to see if anyone has questions for our guests.
Thank you for coming to Fort Worth.
Pleasure.
It's been a wonderful talk. I love all the little stories that go behind it. I have a couple questions. How big is Charles Buck's collection? I mean, obviously he has a lot. And where does he store it all? And what is his legacy plan for everything that he has?
These are very good questions. There are many pieces, and he does enjoy them in his homes, and it's an ever evolving. We move things around and try not to put anything in storage for too long, so that they're out for enjoyment. And it's been a fun challenge with 87 or 83 pieces gone to hang appropriately and fill in. It's been a challenge. So it is a broad collection, and as far as planning, we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
I just thought of this. Is this the earliest work in the collection?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah. Oh,
Hello.
she's got him. She's
there.
walking. Hi.
So I would like to ask, what tips do you have for any young art collectors? Not that I have a lot of money, though, but
Are there young collector events here in Fort Worth? Are there galleries that do like gallery walks on a Friday night once a month, or?
There's a fall and a spring gallery night where like all the galleries are open, and it's kind of a fun event, and you can kind of go across town and all the galleries are open, and it helps you see in a lot of its local artists, and it gives you a chance to see what's going on in the community, what's available for sale locally, which is, I think, helpful. Did you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Andy?
I think the most important one is just don't be don't have any shame about asking a lot of questions,
Yeah.
right? Because, I mean, we're looking at this stuff all the time, and we've seen lots of things. And if you connect with a local gallery or a whatever, just, go back and see. If you really like something, go see it a number of times and ask a lot of questions about it. And, we now have the incredible pleasure of having a few clients who are in their 20s because their parents collected or they became interested. And I love that nowadays. It is so much fun because the young people are so smart and so curious and ask a lot of questions. It helps us do better.
And don't be afraid to ask if the gallery will give you terms.
Yeah.
The first thing I bought was a little etching. It was $500, and I think I took 10 months to pay for it. I'm not kidding. Like I paid $50 a month, and it was finally mine. And I still love it. It was, so anyway, people are willing to work with you if you're not afraid to ask often.
I mean, galleries look kind of fancy nowadays. This wasn't my upbringing, right? They didn't look this fancy in the 70s and 80s. And but they exist to educate you, encourage you, nurture your interest, teach you about the artists. And particularly in the primary market, if we take on a living artist, that's a huge commitment we make. And we're super dedicated to getting their name out there, to helping them find an audience, to encouraging people to collect their work. So, I mean, you're doing the good part for us if you're interested in collecting. And I would say just take good advantage of that, ask a lot, and see what makes sense.
Talk to us in terms of the original artist frame versus a client that wants to reframe things because it fits with the decor or whatever. I mean, what do you advise clients to do in that situation, and what are the pros and cons?
That's an interesting question. About
Joan and I
frames.
talk about this a lot, actually.
Yeah.
But we always advise, well, I shouldn't say always, virtually always advise if it's clearly the artist's intent not to change the frame. We've done a lot with Andrew Wyatt and worked with his family on a bunch of stuff. And they had terrible taste in frames. Andy and Betsy Wise had terrible taste in frames. So, like they did driftwood pretty much around it, right? And so, but if it's clearly the intent, we tend to leave it alone. And it's mostly a modernist impulse from the teens on. It goes back longer, but it becomes very common for artists to partner with a frame maker. So by the time you get to, O'Keeffe, who keeps coming up for me, I don't know why, but we were looking at O'Keeffe. She designed a frame that she wanted made on her frames. She had artisans make some of the frames. That was clearly an intent that it be considered.
It's part of the piece.
Yeah, and if you look in this incredible installation of O'Keeffe that Shirley's done, there's a painting of a patio door that O'Keeffe painted many times. The one hanging here is the most special of that series, in my view, because you'll see that O'Keeffe had made for it a metal frame and then painted the lips of the composition, the edges of the color across the frame. It was clearly her intent that the frame was part of the object. So whenever possible, we now restore what was the original intent. If not, we do research and try and figure out from black and white images in the archives that we can see on our phone now, what did the artist want when they presented in the 20s or the teens? What were they going for? And try and match that up. In original frame, particularly with the artist John Marin, who's up in the exhibition, he painted a star on the great New York Marin that Charles acquired. That's pretty unusual. There are not a lot of artists that go to that length like O'Keeffe and Marin or Hartley. But, it can make a huge difference.
Did you have a question? Yeah, it's right here. Oh, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. In the music world, there's so much conversation around artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
In the screenwriters world, so much conversation around artificial intelligence. I'm wondering where AI, what the conversation is around AI in the art world, if there is one.
It's a super hot topic. We don't really know yet. We are deeply concerned for the artists' estates and foundations we represent, that it threatens their license to the image and the idea. So protecting the artists' rights in that regard is going to be a very complicated issue. You saw it probably this week. There's now there's a song on the top charts of country that was made by AI. So where that comes from and how it gets created is going to be very complicated. I think we've begun using it. I mark in my calendar on the first of every month to do the same searches through AI that I did last month.
Oh my gosh, that is brilliant.
It's kind of stunning just in the last 5-6 months how much better the answers have become that fast. It's transforming our ability to learn. So as a research tool, it's sensational. But I think we just have no clue yet how it's going to impact. It's going to change the world. We don't know how it's going to impact the art business, but that's, the integrity of the art and the artist's ownership of that is my primary concern.
I am a living artist, and my collection has been purchased by people who go into a gallery and walk up, fall in love, and purchase it. And on the rare occasion, that name and contact information is forwarded to me. So I am an artist who has an emerging client list, not a patron list, but just a client or people who have purchased my work. So my question to you, since you actually work directly with mature collectors, is how an artist who is still alive would like to position himself or herself in a place where he is attractive to collectors who are looking for something different. I know it's a big topic, but maybe you could just choose one aspect, one little hint on how I can make myself more appealing to people who are mature collectors.
Well, you're in a small group already of living artists that sell things, right? So many try for so long and sell nothing, candidly. And, we could take on 100 new artists every week if we wished, right? So there's lots of creative activity now. I think the most important thing is if you're fortunate enough to get a primary market representative that's going to really be your partner and steward the work, that is always a good solution because you have somebody else in the game fighting for your interests. And nowadays, social media obviously can transform things. If you can generate a following that way, hugely important. Another thing we've seen a lot of artists be rewarded for is being active participants in the community, artistic community, because what happens nowadays, if you didn't get a gallery to represent you in the 1910s, you were toast. It just wasn't going to work. Nowadays, we find artists collaborate, mention each other, follow each other, collaborate with each other, and that's bringing some kind of communal power to your efforts. I think it's hard to do it alone, is the God's honest truth, unless you're fortunate enough to generate a following on social media.
I liked everything you said, but there's one thing I have absolutely no experience with, and that is a primary representative that you mentioned. And we don't have to belabor this point, but something that I would personally like to hear about, which is, that sounds very antiquated in terms of how the art market works. Is there still a place today for an individual representative who collaborates with an artist?
Oh, for sure. And I think it's critical to success. Our representing of living artists is a very small bit of what we do, but having a collaborator partner that can be, work with you to grow your audience, nurture collectors, et cetera. If the artist does it in their studio, they have no time to paint. If you're good enough at that, you don't have any paintings to sell, right? And so that's a time-honored tradition that's gone on for a long time, but I think it's actually gotten more important now than it was 100 years ago because it's so much harder to break through the noise as an artist without a dealer and without gallery shows. So whether it's locally to where you paint or, you grow an audience that's bigger and get it, the thing that transformed O'Keeffe's career is her friend sent a bundle of drawings to Stieglitz in the mail and then showed up and walked them through it and said, this woman is incredible. You should represent her. And it took a decade to generate an audience and a following, but Stieglitz was committed to it. And he did it year after year after year from the teens until 1923 when she had her first box office show. So, don't be surprised if it takes 10 years. And I would say just don't be surprised that it takes a village, not a person, to do it. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. I love this talk. Now, I have a question. I'm an artist myself, and I collect art, humbly, but I have a lot of original works because I always love visiting museums and collecting art. My grandfather was an artist too. My father-in-law, my parents had like a framing store. So anyway, but I have a question. I have a very good friend of mine. His name is Jorge Coco. He's an older painter. He does religious. It's called Sacro Cubism. Painters, and then last years he got quite popular, and he's selling his paintings for a significant amount of money. I was having lunch with him the other day, and he showed me he has a huge collection of modern art. He's 89 now, so he's older. He's still very active painting. Now he doesn't have his art. Modern art is not well known, so he doesn't know much what to do with it because he loves to do the art, but he sells the other one a lot. He has a lot of demand. Now he's trying to see he's getting older, so he's trying to think what I do with all this work. Should I sell it? Should I keep it? Should I try to do a foundation in the future and keep it for like a retrospective show? What would be your advice for that? And my second question, it would be for me as an artist or any artist, do you recommend people to keep some pieces for their own collection?
Always a good idea. Yeah. But we used to say my father represented a lot of living painters, and we used to say, never question a sold picture, right? Because there's always this regret. It's like, oh, it was so great and I sold it. It's like, yeah, but if you didn't sell it, right? So, there's some artists that have the luxury of success that create foundations. That's definitely part of the process now for a very famous artist. And that's been really good strategy for most, because if the art becomes valuable, it creates all kinds of estate concerns and problems for the family and a lot of indecision. And we've worked with hundreds of artists and collectors' family that when there's an estate, there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's very good to let others know what you wish done. And then foundations are hard to create and, it takes a little bit of time and money, but if there's enough value there, sometimes that makes sense.
When you first heard the news about the theft from the Louvre in recent weeks, as in-depth experts that you are, what were the first couple things that went through your mind?
Well, I was in Paris because it was right at the opening of Art Basel, which is the big art fair there. And every single taxi cab or Uber I got in, they mentioned it, not knowing that I was in the art business or interested in the arts. It's really thought of in France as an act of just grand shame and humiliation. They can't believe it happened. And one taxi driver, I said, a construction guy on a Sunday on a ladder, he said, nobody in France works on Sunday. So, it just didn't make any sense. But, what I found of the French people in the minute was they were ashamed. They were humiliated that it happened.
Yeah.
It's very unusual. It happens very seldom. But
Sorry. I lost the mic.
I got it. You go.
Forgive me, one follow-up on the theft, and I haven't studied the theft of art, but is there usually a buyer already arranged by three guys who I shouldn't, 3 people, maybe there's women art thieves, I don't know. But have they always figured out, all right, I'm going to sell it to person X and Y?
I've been called into some cases. I testified for the FBI a bunch of times, and there was a guy named Jim Wynn that used to run the FBI's art theft division, and he was a team of 1. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. I think the very famous cases like the Isabella Stewart Gardner, it's almost certain that that was for hire. Somebody wanted those pictures, and they paid someone to steal them. Art now, even without blockchain and all the internet resources we have now, it's incredibly hard to transfer a theft of art into cash. It's just really hard. I mean, if somebody walks into our place with an O'Keeffe painting and says, oh, I want to sell it, I mean, we know all of them. There are 2,200 of them. It's not like it's going to slip by us at this point. We're going to know that there's something up. And I've been more often involved in testifying to catch the thieves or something like that than, it just doesn't happen very often. And it's such a difficult commodity to liquidate in a small, knowledgeable market that it's pretty much impossible to get away with long term. I mean, we've been discovering recently there have been lots of locating of things that were stolen 40 years ago. We sold the Andrew Wyatt recently for a guy named Frank Fowler, who recently passed away, was Andrew Wyatt's dealer. And he got back a picture 12 years later that was stolen from the framers. So the thief stole it and just could never convert it into money because he would have been caught the moment he brought it to market. So it's not a good idea if you're planning on it. Right? It's just not going to work. I mean, unless you want it. Yeah. And keep it forever.
For the record, no.
Marin did a lot of maritime works, a lot of works framing the coast of Maine in particular. What drew, and maybe that is the point, but what drew Mr. Butt to those paintings? What did he see in Marin that he really liked?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, he has fallen hook, line, and sinker for Marin. We are marinating in Marins. I think it's that dynamic brushwork, the watercolor, the spontaneity, the vitality, that the energy that so captured that moment in time, which preceded Charles's birth by just a little bit, right? And so that period of time, it was certainly a very, the first half of the 20th century, arguably the American century. I think that sort of comes through in Marin's beautiful watercolors and oils too. And
has an affinity for Maine.
And has
sure.
an affinity
Yeah.
for Maine, yes. And water, all things water and boats.
And then, as you were pointing out earlier, Marin changed up things.
He did.
He was so, and his style evolved
Yeah.
and it became very interesting. I mean, it was interesting to begin with, but it's curious to see which direction he goes because he goes in different ways. So that's another interesting, because there are some artists that you watch over their career and they kind of go off they don't quite know what path to follow. But Marin obviously always was challenging himself and reinventing his imagination about Maine, the way he was painting it.
All right. Well, that is us exactly at time. So thank you all for your wonderful questions. It really furthered our conversation. And thank you, Joan, Andrew, Shirley. This was wonderful. I hope everyone is inspired to start their own collection. And you have about half an hour left to go see Charles Butt's collection before the museum closes this evening. Thank you.
Surged this